So hello everybody. Let's get started with this recording, with this live webinar. I'm recording it, so you will be able to go and look at it again at a later time. If you wish to, go over it again or look at the questions again that are asked. We're going to go over ECHO 201, Microeconomics. And just for the record, my name is not Nicole Soto, like it shows on the host. I am Kiara Yates, and I'm an adjunct faculty for SNU. I've been working here since 2012, and I just use her account to run the live webinars. We're going to go over the requirements of Milestone 1 for Microeconomics. It's going to be pretty streamlined. Milestone 1 is not overly difficult. By now, you should have emailed Ida. You can just log back in the same way you logged in now. Just go back to the same link and just come in, put your name, and you'll be able to log right back into the webinar, even if it's halfway through it at 9 o'clock. So this week you should have emailed your instructor, and you should have asked, told them what firm you're going to research for your Milestone 1, and confirmed with your instructor that the firm you chose is the correct, it's a good firm to research. Some of the main requirements for the firm are that it is U.S. firm, U.S.-based company, and then it's a public company. It's important that it's a public company because you need to have access to the financial reports for that company, which will give you the information necessary to then develop a Milestone 2 and Milestone 3 and go over supply and demand, price elasticity, strategies for the company, and all that information very precious information that you will be able to find in the financial reports. If it's a private company, the financial reports are not public, they're not accessible, and therefore you would not be able to find that information. So make sure you chose a public company that shares the financial reports with its shareholders, and that it's a U.S. company. I apologize if I have to cough a little bit. I'll try to cough away from the microphone. For Milestone 1, there's two elements that you need to develop. You first need to introduce your paper, and then you have to provide a history of the company. When you introduce your paper, you just outline the purpose of the whole final project, basically, and the whole paper. You're actually acting like, yes, Elizabeth, you can use the ones the professor posts in the suggested list. If you go by the suggested list, then that's a safe list and you'll be fine. The purpose of the paper is what? You are acting as a consultant for the company. You will do research on the company using the microeconomic knowledge that you're going to acquire throughout the course, through your reading. And you're going to apply that knowledge to your company. You're going to research all the information of the company and then apply what you're learning week by week to your company. You're going to make an analysis of supply and demand, an analysis of consumer responsiveness to changes in the product, in the price. You're going to outline the microeconomic aspects, basically, of the company. And based on your research, you're going to end up providing recommendations for your company. The recommendations will be provided in Milestone 3. So in the introduction here, all you have to do is explain what you're going to do throughout the course, basically, that you're going to research your company and that you're going to provide recommendation at the end. And so the outcomes of your research are going to inform your conclusions for the firm. So the introduction is fairly streamlined. You just one or two paragraphs, I would say, that explain what you're going to do. Don't forget that pretend you're acting as the consultant of the company and that you're going to research it, and it'll just make easier the introduction. In the second part, of the milestone, you're going to outline the history of the company. You want to have a pretty detailed history. You don't just want to have a sentence or a brief, paragraph of the history, but you actually want to explain where the company started, how it evolved, and where it stands right now. So you can start talking about who founded the company, how it grew. It eventually became it might have started as a private company that eventually became public. So you might want to also, you can explain when the company became public. Uh, and just provide a good overview of the history. Um, yes, you're going to format everything in APA style. And if you follow this document I have opened here is also available through your final project supplemental resources in your course. And you'll be able to open this document, and it provides you the guidelines for APA. So it tells you what font size you need to use, the spacing, how to format your references, how to include your citations. You can you can put titles in your essay if you want to, like write introduction, history, if you prefer, or you don't have to, though. You can just divide it by paragraphs and not put a title in and just make a paper that flows. That is entirely up to you if you want to use the paragraph titles or not. With APA style, you need to make sure you cite consistently. Every source that you research and you use in your paper needs to be cited within the content. It might be cited multiple times if you use it often, but you need to make sure you cite it. And then every source needs to be referenced at the end of the paper. The reference list is nothing other than a reflection of all the citations you included in the paper. Eileen, this is micro. Micro is at 9, yes. Wanda, yes, it's macroeconomics. Really, milestone 1 is pretty easy and streamlined, as I said. You will be able to find all the information for the history of the company on the website of your company. Usually, if you go in the About section, they'll provide you a pretty good history. And then if you want to, you can research it through other websites, but I would say to start from the company's website. For the microeconomics students, besides using the company's website that has all the financial statements, you can also use the Shapiro library. It is a very useful resource, and I can share a YouTube video for you. I'm going to give you the link in here that you'll be able to use. If you watch this YouTube video, it shows you how to use the Shapiro library to do the research on your company. It's the first 48 minutes of the video focus on microeconomics. The remainder of the time it focuses on macroeconomics on Echo 202, but the first 48 minutes, it's all Echo 201, and it shows you how to use the Shapiro library to complete the milestones and the final, in addition to using the website of the company. So that is a very good. Yes, Andre, supply and demand will be in the next milestone, so we're not going to go over that tonight because we're limiting to milestone 1. And so basically, we already finished explaining milestone 1. Now, if you want to start working on it and be ready for the final, what you can do is use the rubric of the final to develop your milestones, because the rubric of the final has an additional category, that of the exemplary category, that requires you to put a little bit more content development in your elements. And you might want to start doing that as you develop the milestones, and this way you won't have to do as much work when you start assembling the final at the end of the course. Yes, the rubric, Douglas, covers every element that is included in the milestone. So if you follow the rubric, you cannot fail. The rubric for the milestones only has the proficient, needs improvement, and not provided categories, but the rubric for the final has, as I said, this additional category of exemplary. And so with the additional category of exemplary, for example, The introduction requires you to use specific terminology that is relevant to the industry. So if you use that already in the milestone, then you're set for the final. You won't have to go and make adjustments to be exemplary in the final. For the history part, it wants you to explain well how the company is relevant to your research and that the company is suitable to your research. And so if you already explain that in your milestone, you won't have to go make those adjustments in the final because you should be already exemplary for the purposes of the final. So this is all for ECHO 201. As I said again, I invite you to go watch that YouTube video that explains how to use the Shapiro library to research your company and also use the company's website. It is really useful. It will have all the financial reports. And when you go through the financial reports, there's going to be sections, obviously, that is all numbers, the financial statements. But at the end, they have the notes to the financial report. And in the notes to the financial report, you can find a wealth of information because it's the comments that the administrators make about the company and about what their prospects, what demand and supply was for the year and what they think it's going to be in the future. If they have projected plans, the strategies. So you can find a lot of information that you can then use in milestone 2 and milestone 3. Yes, Andre, so you're going to complete each milestone, like you submit milestone 1 by this Sunday, and then you're going to submit milestone 2 and module 3, and so forth. And then when you have all 3 milestones, you can use the feedback provided for your instructor to see how you need to make improvements. You assemble them, making one long paper that flows, and then you have your final. So really, if you work well on the milestones and you get full credit for the milestones, you should only be able to put them all together and submit them at the end of the course. The final should not take a long time to put together if you have worked well on the milestones. Eileen is asking, does anything need to be in the milestone submission by the text heading, no title page or anything? Yes, you do need a title page. As you can see on this document, you need a title page with your name on it. And like you would write SNU ECHO 201 maybe on it. You will need the running head. And then you would start your paper. And I said you can have titles to the paragraphs. You don't have to have titles. I guess if you're in doubt, you can always ask your instructor. You make sure you cite your that you cite all your sources and that you reference it. And if you see here where it says title paper, it says this template is formatted according to APA style guidelines, which is 1-inch top bottom, left and right margins, Times New Roman font 12, double spaced, align flush left. So you follow paragraphs indented 5 to 7 spaces. So you follow the instructions that are on this sample paper that you can find in your supplemental resources for the final. And then you're going to be fine with the APA formatting. Yes, title pages you need to include. You will have a title page for every milestone you submit. So if you submit, some students will submit the milestone just adding to the first one, but I would recommend that you ask your instructor. Some instructors want the milestones to be all separate and in their own standing. They prefer that. Other instructors don't care. So you want to ask your instructor what they prefer. If they want you to have a brand new document for each milestone, and then you will have to assemble them yourself at the end, or if you can keep working in the same document throughout the milestones. Oh, thank you, Christine. You're welcome. Craig, you said you've not. Yes, you use the title page because this is just like it's a paper you're submitting. So you need the title page, you need the content, you need the references at the end. If you don't have a title page, I would say you're not going to get 100% on the articulation of response. So just as a heads up. So you want to make sure that you, and I don't know, yes, the headings, Bill, headings make it easier reading when you get to milestone 2 and 3. That is correct. Jen, for Echo 201, we started at 8:30. The milestone 1 is fairly short. It does not require a lot of content development because it's really just the introduction to the company you're going to research and the history of the company. So we kind of went through the requirements of the rubric fairly seamlessly, and now we're just answering questions. Yes, so Echo 202 will start at 9 o'clock. Yes, the title can be your company name. Make sure you include your name in the title page, and you write SNU on it as part of, indicate what organization you're part of. Connie, it really depends on how much you write. I would say that, for example, for the introduction here that says Introduction in History, as you can see, it's a page and a few lines. Most students usually have a page and a half for milestone 2, a page and a half to 2 pages. So this is actually on the shorter end. As long as your content is exhaustive, I don't count the pages. Bill, I don't think you count the pages too, right? I just make sure that everything is included that covers the elements of the rubric. As long as it's exhaustively included and it's correct by economic terms, I don't really look at the lengths. Oh yeah, the final paper could be that much. I mean, if you have, say, 2 pages, it's 15 pages. Consider you're including references, you're including a title page. You might have 2 pages for milestone 1. Milestone 2 is definitely going to be longer. It's going to be at least probably 4 to 5 pages because you're developing supply and demand. So it takes a little longer. You might be including some graphics, visual aids. And then you have milestone 3, which is probably going to be another 4 to 5 pages. You can easily get to 15 pages or more. Adam, as I said, most students usually have a page and a half to 2 pages for milestone 1. And that is not including the title page. In the past, the date was also required. Most students put a date in. In this sample paper, they don't ask you to put a date. So if you don't put a date, you shouldn't be penalized. So yes, it is due on Sunday. The milestone 1 is due on Sunday. Make sure you post it well before 11:59 p.m., which is the due date, because sometimes it takes some time for the assignments to upload. It might take a few minutes and you can be late. Some instructors are more lenient about being a few minutes late. Some instructors are not. Especially when you get to the last week of class, when you're posting your final. If you're posting it on the last day of class because maybe you're late or something, you really want to make sure you post well within that 11:59 deadline, just in case the website is slow and it takes time to upload the file. So Randy, if your content is exhaustive, it sticks to the topic, you cover the elements, if you write too much, you shouldn't be penalized, quite honestly. I mean, for Echo 202 last semester, we had a student who turned a 3 or 4 slides PowerPoint into something like a 10 to 12 slide PowerPoint, and he wasn't penalized for going longer. So, I mean, as long as the content is relevant to the requirements of the rubric, to the elements you have to develop, you should be fine. You shouldn't have to worry about the lengths. Yes, Robin, the Shapiro library can be a little tough to use. As I said before, you're probably going to find most of your content on the website of the firm you are researching. If you go in the financial statements of the firm, you scroll down the initial parts of your financial statements, there's going to be the notes to the financial statements. And in those notes, there's going to be a wealth of information that you can use to develop all 3 milestones. Oh, thank you, Bill, for sharing that. Randy, I've usually done well with this, but is there a case of sourcing too much? When you say sourcing too much, like if you're using too many sources to back up your Yes, Julie, this is actually being recorded. And once I finish the milestones at 9:30, I'm going to download it and upload it to YouTube. And it will be available tomorrow through the Echo SNU channel. And your instructor should also be sharing a link to it through the announcements tomorrow sometime. Oh, thank you, Tamara. Back to reading. Yes, I hope I feel better. I definitely need to do something because it's been ongoing for more than a week now. So we're going to wait a few more minutes before we start macroeconomics. Since we finished so early for micro. I don't know, Bill, if you have anything that you might want to add that could be useful for milestone 1. And just, you're welcome, Yvonne. Just going over it, just remember APA style. Remember to cite all your sources and to reference all your sources. Remember in the title paper to outline the purpose of the paper. Obviously, you don't have enough knowledge of the economic concepts yet because you're still studying it, but you just want to explain what you're going to be doing through these weeks, that you're going to research your company and you're going to find out about their economic outcomes to provide recommendations at the end of the paper. Yes. So thank you, Monique. Tia, you don't have to sign in to get a transcript of the webinar. Check your classroom tomorrow and your instructor should be sharing a link to the recording of this webinar. Right now we went through ECHO 201, Microeconomics, and in a few minutes we will be switching to ECHO 202, Macroeconomics, and the whole recording will be available through YouTube. There's a channel, it's called SNU Echo Channel. If you go on it, you can find even the old webinars. There is also a second channel. It's called, that I found out about today. It's called, which is linked through your classroom at this time. And it's called Echo 201 and Echo 202 channel, SNU channel. And you can, if you go on there, there's the video to how to use Shapiro. There's a video on how to use other websites that could be useful for the development of the milestones. There is a general video on how to develop milestone 1 for ECHO 201 that doesn't refer to this semester. It's just a general video for it. So you can actually go and watch more YouTube videos that were made by Nicole when she was a business lead. And that can be useful. That can help you develop the milestones and get through the course. You're welcome, Julie. Usually the ECHO webinars will be available the next day, yes. I share the link after I shut the webinar down at 9:30. I upload it to YouTube and share the link with the instructors. So usually by midnight, it's uploaded and available on YouTube. And the instructors will share the link with the classroom the next day or as soon as they can. Oh, thank you, Martin. I actually cough more because I'm talking now. I don't have that much. Thank you, David. I don't feel that bad. It's just my voice feels bad because of the cough, but I'm actually feeling pretty good. We're going to take another few minutes before we start ECHO 202. I'm going to start uploading the right document we will need. This way we'll be ready when the students come in. Let me see if this is the right one. This is not the right one. And this way, oh, thank you, Amy. Bye, everybody. I'll see you in 2 weeks. Make sure to log in for milestone 2. Milestone 1 was fast. It went fast, and there was not a lot of information to share. But for Milestone 2, there will be a lot of information to share. So you want to make sure that you do log in for that one, because there'll be a lot of useful information you'll be able to get from there. Hi, Santi. Are you in here for Echo 201 or Echo 202? And if you have any questions, you have a few minutes to ask. Yes, the webinar will be posted to YouTube as soon as we are done at 9:30, so you'll be able to watch the recording. Thank you, Randy. Oh, you'll be fine, I'm sure. You can never include enough information when you're doing your research, so you'll be just fine. You're welcome, Santi. We're going to wait a few more minutes, make sure all the Echo 202 students are able to log in, and so we can move on. So while we're waiting, as I said, I shared the link for those of you that might have arrived late. I shared the link to a YouTube video that explains how to use the Shapiro library. And Bill Criswell, he's another adjunct that's participating tonight, also shared a link, if you scroll further up, to show that has a bit of a guide on how to use the Shapiro library. It's a very useful tool that you can use to develop Milestone 1, 2, 3 for Microeconomics, Echo 201, because you can access information on your company. You can also access that information through the company website, through the financial statements. So those are the main two resources you will be using for Microeconomics Echo 201 to develop your milestones. Milestone 1 goes pretty fast because it doesn't have a lot of requirements, since it's only the introduction and the history of the company you have chosen. If you have not emailed your instructor yet and tell them what company you have chosen, I recommend that you do it, especially if you're not sticking to the list of suggestion that was provided in the course, because you might think you have a really awesome company to research. Maybe you work for that company, or you have in the past, but that company may not meet the minimum requirements to be appropriate for the milestones. Yeah, oh, thank you, Bill, for sharing that again. I was looking for it. The company has to be US based, and it needs to be a public company so that you can have access to the financial reports. So you need to make sure you have at least these two requirements met. Otherwise, you won't be able to find enough information to do your research. You can find the history everywhere, but you won't be able to find the information you need, all the sales figures that you need to determine, for example, the demand trends for your company. You won't be able to determine supply trends for your company. And you really want to be able to see the numbers and determine those trends to develop Milestone 2. So make sure that your company is traded on the stock exchange, and this way they have to make their financial statements public. Okay, we are 1 minute away from 9 o'clock, so we can start working on Echo 202, Macroeconomics. Welcome everybody. If you were here waiting for Echo 202, hi Jen. I know there's a few people that logged in too early and are going to come back any minute now. We're going to go over, hi Mike and Leslie. Wanda, you're back. I know there was someone else who was coming back. We're going to work on the requirements of Milestone 1. Now for macroeconomics, you have to develop a PowerPoint. And I know that it can be a little bit more challenging for some of you who might not be well acquainted with PowerPoints. The important thing to establish right away is that you're going to develop your content in the slide, that you're going to develop the slides, and you're going to include some core content in those slides, but you will need to develop the most of the content, like the essay-like content in the speaker notes. So you want to make sure that you know what the speaker notes are and how to access them. The speaker notes are a little area when you open your PowerPoint that is visible under the slide where you can write. If you are going to use the template provided by Southern New Hampshire, when you open the PowerPoint, that area is visible, and there's actually some instructions in it. So you delete the instructions and you start writing your content. If you do not develop the speaker notes, you will not get a grade higher than a needs improvement. It doesn't matter how much content you include in the slide, you will need to have that content developed in the speaker notes. One of the reasons you need the speaker notes is because to be able to exhaustively explain the content of your milestones, you will need that space. The slide is not big enough to include all that content, and also the slide is necessary. You need to use that to include visual aids like graphs, charts, tables. So if you're using the slide for charts and tables, you don't have enough space to develop the discussion, the content, the analysis, the economic analysis you're going to carry out. Can you hear me, Jen? I think everybody can hear me. My computer is showing that I do have the microphone working. Yeah, sometimes it's Adobe that acts up. Thank you. I'm glad everybody else can hear me. So for your milestone 1, you will be creating a presentation title. You'll have a title that could be related to the decade you chose. If you chose the 60s, 70s, you can just call it 1960s. You can call it 1970s. You can give it a more creative title if you would like to. There's someone else who can't hear us. You include your name in the first slide, right? Echo 202. You can write the instructor's name based on this sample, and you move on. I mean, this is the easiest part, just to follow APA guidelines. You will provide a brief outline of your decade. You just go over the 10-year period that you chose and just provide what maybe the main highlights of that period are. This element of the rubric of the slide, it doesn't have a rubric element to be graded. It's just a brief introduction you're providing to submit a complete work. So the introduction would be more part of the articulation of response section than anything else. After you've done your introduction, you can finally get into the heart of the matter. So for the first 1 or 2 slides of this milestone, you will be researching the gross domestic product and growth of your decade. The gross domestic product that you will research is the real GDP. The real GDP is the GDP adjusted for inflation. And you want to research the real one because that will be the most accurate measurement of the growth for your decade. The GDP is expressed usually in billion of dollars. So you might find a chart that's in billion of dollars. The growth will be expressed in percentage change. When you develop this slide, you're actually analyzing both. You're providing the trends for the GDP. So you might have a chart that shows a graph that shows the GDP trends, how it goes up and down throughout the decade. And then you can either calculate the growth rate if you want to. There's a very useful video in the My Econ Lab resources that you can use to calculate the growth to learn how to do it. Or you can just research growth and use a chart to show the growth too, and this way you won't have to calculate it. Now make sure that you use the slides to show your charts and graphs, or a table. You can use a table, and then that you can develop your analysis in the speaker notes. And the analysis you're going to develop in the speaker notes is you're going to explain what you observed from the chart. So if the GDP, peaked at some point during the decade, you will want to explain that. Maybe you can indicate the number, like it went from this number X to another X number. When you discuss growth, you want to use those percentages. You want to show, you don't want to say that the growth for the overall decade was, I don't know, 7%. No, you want to show the growth year by year or a couple of years by a couple of years throughout the decade, because that is what the rubric requires, is for you to show the annual trends and the annual growth for your decade, not the overall growth for the decade. The overall growth for the decade could be deceiving because, you might have growth overall, but it doesn't explain what happened in the middle of the decade where you might have had a recession, or you might have had a slowdown of growth. So you want to be able to discuss your yearly GDP and your yearly growth. To find the charts for GDP and growth and also unemployment, inflation, and interest rates, you can use FRED. FRED is the St. Louis Federal Reserve website that you can use. I will post the link in here for you. Let me copy it and paste it. There it is. So if you go on the Federal Reserve, St. Louis Federal Reserve website, you write real GDP. It'll give you a chart. You can go on this chart and you can select specifically the decade that you want to research. So if you're doing the 70s, you can say you want to know the GDP growth from 1970 to 1980, and you can highlight just that section. And then if you click on the high left corner, you will be able to export, and you can choose export to PowerPoint. And when you choose that option, it will open a PowerPoint slide, and that chart will be in there. And then all you need to do is copy and paste that slide into your presentation, and you will have your graph. So the St. Louis Federal Reserve website is the most used tool for Milestone 1. That is your to-go place to find the graphs and the chart. You might be able to find the graphs and the chart through other websites, but this is the best place to find it, especially when you're researching growth, GDP growth. You can find the unemployment and the inflation charts here. You can also find those through the Bureau of Labor Statistics, BLS.org, which is another very useful website. If you notice when you look at this slide, and you have this presentation in your final project supplemental resources, so you can go open it there, there's some highlighted, underlined green words, blue words. If you click on those, you can open the hyperlink, and it will take you to FRED, or it will take you to the video that explains how to calculate growth. And it takes you to a video that explains how to use FRED. Because FRED actually, they made a video to explain and show how to use their website. So you can use these links to help you in finding additional information. I apologize if I have to cough every once in a while. Once you have researched the GDP, so you've had your charts, you have your chart of real GDP, you have your chart for growth, you have analyzed both of them, you're going to move on to another slide. And this might take 2 slides just because you need more room. You're going to create another slide that focuses on the events that impacted the growth for your decade. When we're talking of the events that impact growth, we're not talking of the recession, because the recession is the economic outcome. The recession is the dip in the GDP. You want to talk of the historical events that would have affected your decade. So if you're discussing the 60s, for example, you have the war in Vietnam. In the 50s, you have the war in Korea. In the 70s, you have the oil embargo. In the 2000s, we have the terror attacks. We have the housing bubble. At the end of the 90s, you have the technology bubble. In the 1980s, there's a start to the end of the Cold War. There's high investment in defense spending, and the 1980s are the ones that doesn't have any wars that I know of. But like the beginning of the 90s, end of 1980s, beginning of the 90s, there was the war in Kuwait. So all these events, historical events, impacted the economy in one form or the other. And that is what you want to do in your second slide for the GDP. You want to find these events. I mean, it could be a natural event like Hurricane Katrina, for example. You want to identify these events and you want to explain using economic principles how they impacted growth. So make sure you develop that slide. Don't overlook it. I recommend not to blend your analysis of the GDP with the events that affected it, because sometimes you tend on falling short on either or, and then you wouldn't get a proficient on both of them. Yes, so the 80s had Mount St. Helens. Thank you, Leslie. Every decade has some sort of historical event that might have impacted the economy. In this instance, we are not asking you to tell us about the fiscal policies, because that is discussed in Milestone 2. We're not asking you to tell us that the recession affected the economy, because the recession didn't affect the economy. The recession is the effect on the economy. So the recession is the outcome of the housing bubble. And so the recession is not the historical event, but it's mostly the outcome. The fiscal policies, they are enacted to affect the economy. That's the reason that they've been enacted. They might be enacted to slow down the economy, to speed up the economy. So those are not the events we're looking for. We're actually looking for historical events. If you have trouble identifying them, you're not sure, reach out to your instructor and they can help you. Your instructor is there to help you. They really, we are here to guarantee your success through the course, to help you navigate the course. And you just need to reach out, send an email, ask for some hints on what events are more relevant for this decade. If you have your events, but you're not sure, you can ask. And you will be answered. You will receive the information you need. So once you've gone through the GDP, yes, Megan, you can find the real GDP information and you can put the chart on a PowerPoint. You can put a chart, you can put a table. Some students will create a table that has the real GDP values in one column and the growth in the other column, for example. Other students will use two different graphs. An example of the presentation. There used to be an example of an exemplary presentation made by a student, but I believe that is not shared anymore through the course. Bill, I'm not sure if you want to confirm that. They used to have it, and it was a PowerPoint that focused on the 1980s. Even though they had X'd out the decade, you could still figure it out by reading it. But I don't believe that is shared through the classroom anymore. I haven't seen it for a while. I mean, the best, and that presentation was also, it was an excellent presentation, but it was a 30-slide presentation, and I think it discouraged students because usually 15, 17 slides is sufficient. That was a really long presentation. Yeah, I haven't seen it in a while either. I don't think that presentation is shared anymore. And it also puts the students who chose the 1980s at an advantage, because as much as you can X out the dates and some of the information, I mean, the information was there. It was too obvious. So I think they removed it. Oh, there is still one with the other final projects. If you go in the final project supplemental resources, if there is a sample for the milestones, it'll be in there. But I think they only have this final project sample with all the links that I'm aware of. So once you've developed the GDP, you can move on and you can analyze unemployment and inflation. Same thing here. You're going to go on FRED, or you can go on the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and you will be able to find a graph or a chart that shows you the unemployment trends and the inflation trends for your decade. Well, the unemployment data is unavailable. Mike, are you talking about FRED? The unemployment data is unavailable from FRED. Oh, you clicked on the link on here. Go on FRED on the St. Louis Federal Reserve website and research unemployment, and you should be able to download a graph. for your decade that you can use in this presentation. So some students manage to find graphs that have both unemployment and inflation in the same chart so that they can contrast them. Once you have found your graphs which show the fluctuations, then you need to develop your analysis in the speaker notes. In the speaker notes, you're going to discuss unemployment and inflation and the trends in relation to the GDP trends that you analyzed in the previous slide. So you want to make sure that you make that relation. Like, for example, unemployment increases when the GDP decreases. So when there is an economic depression, when the economy slows down, unemployment tends to increase. When unemployment increases, usually inflation tends to decrease because there's a short-run trade-off between unemployment and inflation, which is represented by the Phillips curve. So you can use the Phillips curve if you want to use an economic model to explain the relationship between unemployment and inflation. But the real focus of this slide is the relationship between unemployment and inflation versus growth and GDP versus the national output. So don't lose that focus. The other thing you want to do is, here again, you need to develop another slide that analyzes the events, the historical events that impacted unemployment and inflation. And I encourage you greatly to use exactly the same events that you used for the GDP, because the events that impacted the GDP will be the same events that impacted unemployment and inflation. I mean, they all work together. These factors move together. When growth changes, unemployment and inflation will change. Now, if you're discussing the 1970s, if the 1970s is your decade, you will surely see that there was a change. The economic model did not stand true during the 1970s because unemployment and inflation were both high. And so that is when you want to, you can use the economic model to discuss that. In the milestone, all you have to do is analyze the trends, the fluctuations of unemployment and inflation, and relate them to changes in the gross domestic product. In the final, to be exemplary, there's an extra category of exemplary, you will also have to explain how the data is collected and calculated. So the data is collected through for unemployment and inflation. You can find that information through the Census Bureau and through the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And you might just want to do that during your milestone development. This way you don't have to go back and rework it for the final. If you don't do it, it's fine. You can still be proficient. But if you do it, it's done. You only have to touch the slide one time. Anne says the last link on the final project shows an example. Oh, thank you, Anne, for sharing that. Once you have developed at least two slides on unemployment and inflation, one that shows the trends and the fluctuations related to the GDP, and the other slide would analyze the historical and current events that affected unemployment and inflation, you will be able to move on and analyze interest rates. Again, here, you want to use Fred, possibly, or you can go on, on any Federal Reserve website anyways. And you want to find a chart that shows the trends, the interest rate trends. To do that, you can use the federal funds rate, the 3-month treasury rate, or the bank prime loan rate. You don't have to use all three. Just choose one and use that chart to show the fluctuations. I mean, you literally graphically want to show the ups and downs, or if it didn't go up and down, if it stayed pretty steady for the decade. Once you have found the fluctuations, you want to explain how change in interest rate is going to affect other factors of the economy. The factors of the economy are clearly listed in your rubric, and it's going to be investments, foreign trade, inflation, GDP. So you want to make sure you analyze how the interest rates can affect. I mean, a change in interest rates is going to affect foreign trade. Why? Because when interest rates change, they affect the exchange rate of a currency. And as our currency fluctuates up and down in value, it will change the amount of goods we import and we export. So it's going to affect foreign trade. In the same way, it's going to affect investments. We get foreign investments based on the status of our economy, based on the value of our currency. And local trade, domestic trade investments, I mean, because if interest rates are higher, businesses are not going to take out loans to improve or build up their business because it's going to be too expensive. At the same way, like maybe if interest rates are higher, you're less likely to decide to go buy a house. So interest rates have an impact on the economy, and you just have to explain what that impact is. And you can find the list in the rubric of the main elements that you need to, which would be inflation, investment in foreign trade, GDP. If you want to go beyond and you want to prepare for the final, you would go beyond these elements listed in the slides and find other impacts, other effects of interest rates on the economy, and then you would already be exemplary for the purpose of the final. Mary, you notate the analysis is all developed in the speaker notes. So you want to make sure that you use the slide for your visual aids. For the charts and the graphs, you might put some keywords in it. For example, when you're developing the slide regarding the historical events that impacted the GDP, like the 1970s, and you want to say there was an oil embargo at the beginning of the decade, you would just write oil embargo, maybe the year, and then you would develop the analysis in the speaker notes, and you would explain what type of impact the oil embargo had on the economy, what type of impact it had on GDP, what kind of impact it had on unemployment and inflation for the 1970s. So all your analysis is developed in the speaker notes. If you don't develop the speaker notes, you will not get any more than a needs improvement if your speaker notes are empty. Now, when I'm talking of developing the speaker notes, I've had students write a brief one-line sentence. That does not constitute developing an analysis in the speaker notes. An analysis is, a couple sentences, a paragraph, a well-developed paragraph or two that explains the dynamics, the economic dynamics of your decade in regards to that specific element. So in regards to GDP, in regards to unemployment and inflation, or in regards to interest rates, you will develop one or two paragraphs at least explaining the fluctuations of these factors, how unemployment and inflation fluctuate with GDP, for example, how interest rates affect their factors. So your speaker notes will be in the essay form. They're not bullet points. And it's just, your analysis. It would be maybe what you would say in words if you were explaining that same element in front of people. You would be speaking, and what you would be speaking is what you would be including in those speaker notes. So make sure you develop your speaker notes exhaustively. The slides will contain your visual aids. They will contain your graphs. They will contain a few keywords that direct the person to the speaker notes. Now make sure that you follow APA guidelines in terms of citing your sources and referencing them. So you have to cite your sources accurately. Just because you've listed it in the references, it doesn't mean that we assume that you've referred to it. The source needs to be cited. It needs to be cited at the end of the sentence that is in reference to that source at the end of the paragraph, depending on what you wrote and what you included. It might be cited multiple times because you've used it multiple times throughout the milestone. So you need to make sure. Oh, Jen, there's a YouTube video on how to use speaker notes. I'm actually going to direct you. If you go to your final project supplemental resources, there is a link to a YouTube channel. That I'm going to link you here too. It's called Echo 201, Echo 202 SNU channel. Like this. If you search it in YouTube, you will find it. Now in this channel, there's a whole bunch of videos. They're mostly resources that show you how you can use Fred, for example. There's resources that show you how to add speaker notes to your presentation. It shows you how to save your presentation in PDF so that you can submit it to the classroom. So there's a lot of instructional videos that you can use. For YouTube, I tend to use, there's one guy that I particularly think he explains pretty well how to add the speaker notes that I will share here. So if you don't know how to add speaker notes, and watch this YouTube video, and he explained it. Yes, Marie, you need to include a reference slide. That's part of the APA style requirements. So once you have included your title page, you have an introduction, then you develop the elements of the rubric, and then you will have a reference slide. You will have this for every milestone. So when you do milestone 2, you will have another title page. You will have the development of the content. You don't need the introduction there. And then you will have your references page again. Now, when you get to your final, all you'll do is you'll get your slides and you put them all together. So you'll just have one title page, obviously, and one references page. Ask your instructor. Some instructors want the milestone to be all submitted separately. Other instructors allow you to keep working in the same file and just add slides so that your final project is already made. But some instructors do not prefer that. They would prefer for you to have a different file for each milestone you develop. But definitely use this YouTube video to learn how to use the speaker notes. Speaker notes are essentials to get a proficient and also to get an exemplary in the final. If you get a needs improvement in the final for that element, it means you got an F just for that element. Because in the final, since you have an extra category, needs improvement is below a D. So you need to be at least proficient and then exemplary to get a passing grade for the final project. So when you develop your milestone, try to go the extra step. Try to include some of the information you need for the final. This way you don't have to go back, rework it again. It just saves you time at the end of the course since you're already working on the slides. Douglas is asking, when we do the GDP section of our PowerPoint, what unit from the drop down of Fred will we use to show the growth rate? Usually the growth rate is shown in percentage change. So you would want to do the percentage change. There are different options. You want to make sure you choose the real GDP. The GDP is usually expressed in billions of dollars. So that for the GDP part, you would use that. And for the growth part, you would use the percentage change. The regular PowerPoint for the milestone. Roshwan, you can use the template that SNU provides to get a start on the PowerPoint. If you're very well acquainted, if you're comfortable with PowerPoint, you can start a brand new PowerPoint. You can decorate it yourself, embellish it any way you like yourself, as long as it's relevant to the content and the elements outlined in the rubric. You have students that sometimes get a little creative with the visual aids just to make it a little bit more fun. As long as you have your content well developed in the speaker notes and your slides are relevant to the content, you'll be fine. But, students that are less comfortable with PowerPoint because they've never used it, I definitely recommend you to start from the template. Because the template has already formatted the slides in a way that is easily readable. It has some instructions in the speaker notes, so it has a little bit more guidance that you'll be able to use. You're welcome, Roshan. Any more questions? Douglas, the percentage change from a year ago. Well, yes, you want the percentage change year by year when you do the growth, because that's how you're going to show the fluctuations for the decade. As I said at the beginning, when you're developing your analysis on growth, I don't want to read that growth from 1960 to 1970s was 7%, for example. I want to know what the growth was from 1960 to 61 to 62 to 63, year by year. The rubric requires you to analyze the annual GDP and to discuss the growth rates. So you do not want to do for the decade. You want to do for smaller parts of the decade to actually show what the fluctuations were for the whole decade. You're welcome. Do we have any more questions? Milestone 1 is pretty streamlined. You're just going to do a data analysis pretty much, because you research GDP, you research unemployment and inflation, and you research the interest rates. This information, the reason you're researching all this data for milestone 1 is because when you get to milestone 2 and 3, you're going to analyze you're going to discuss the policies enacted through your decade, and you're going to analyze the impact of those policies. And when you analyze the impact, you will need the data from milestone 1 to show what the impact was in numbers, like how much did unemployment change, how much did inflation or GDP change. So you will use this information from milestone 1 to help you develop the last slides of milestone 2 and milestone 3. Yes, the GDP you would do yearly. Yes, millions of dollars, Wanda. And you want to make sure it's the real GDP. You know, the GDP adjusted for inflation, not nominal GDP. The real GDP is the most accurate measurement of growth for the decade, the one that is adjusted for inflation. If there's no more questions, we can close the session for tonight. It's 9:30, past 9:30. Thank you for attending, and we'll be back with milestone 2 in 2 weeks. And it will always be on a Wednesday night at 9 o'clock for Echo 202. You're welcome. You're welcome, Patricia. If this milestone, this live webinar has been recorded, so it will be available through YouTube tomorrow. Your instructor should be sharing a link to it. If for some reason you're in a hurry, you want to see it before the link is shared, you just research in YouTube Echo SNU channel, and you will find the recording for this webinar. You're welcome. So you'll be able to go look it up again. You can also access the webinars from previous semesters. So you'll be able to, you can go look up those webinars, see if maybe some different information was shared, depending on the questions of the students. And as I said, you can go on the Echo 201, Echo 202 channel and find some resources that would be useful. Definitely look up the YouTube video to learn how to use Fred. That is pretty useful. And it's on the Echo 201, Echo 202 channel. It will be helpful if you're having trouble. If you are still having trouble using Fred, reach out to your instructor, because they can give you some guidance too about that. Yes, the link for the web was here is, let me find it again, because I think I had it on. So this is the this is the link for the Echo 201, Echo 202 channel. And then within this channel, you can find there's a video. Let me find it real quick for you. Here it is, how to use Fred. This is actually a video that is being created by Fred for the students that use it. Fred has its own YouTube channel. So the second one is how to use Fred. If you access this YouTube channel video, it will teach you how to use Fred, how to build your chart. You can go up in the left-hand corner, the right-hand corner, sorry, and you can select to download to PowerPoint, and it will open a PowerPoint with that chart in it, and at that point you'll be able to copy and paste it in your original PowerPoint. So that's the easiest way to download the PowerPoint from Fred and include it in your, so go watch the videos. And have a good evening, everybody. Reach out to your instructors if you have trouble developing Milestone 1. If you have other questions that you come up after tonight. Your instructors are here to make you successful. You need to reach out, you need to ask questions. We do answer them. We're happy when students engage with us and reach out and ask us questions, because it improves the outcome of your milestones. It makes it easier for us to grade them and to provide you feedback. So have as much interaction